I was racking my brain. It was deeper in my body, but anyway, I was looking for what topic would be useful at this point in the program. I wasn't very clear. Um, so I thought I would share some stories that might be helpful. And when I thought about the stories that I thought would be helpful, it came down to, let's talk about motivation. That might be useful. Before I ordained, and it took me a very long time to come to that, that's a whole other story. I interviewed everybody that I saw. You know, what was your story? How did that happen for you? What's it about for you? What's that like? One of the stories that particularly moved me literally, was from a nun who lived in Montana. Any nuns who watch this, if I don't get the details of your story right, I'm sorry, it's been a few years. But she and I had discussed ordaining for a long time. I knew her, not well, but I knew her, and she'd thought about it, and she had a career, and maybe she would, maybe she wouldn't. And a senior nun was teaching in her town, and I went over to hear the teaching, and we had a late dinner one night talking about, what did you do ordain? What do you think about ordaining? Should I, shouldn't I? And then I saw this person a few years later in robes. I said, what happened? She said, well, after all these years of thinking about it and looking at my motivation and really, being completely devoted to the Dharma, but also loving my career and just not sure and what would I do, she said, I went home for lunch one day like I did every day from work, and I made myself a little lunch that I made like every day from work. I had some vegetables and some tofu and some couscous. And she said, I sat there and ate my lunch, I thought mindfully, and then I got a big chunk of couscous caught in my throat. And I coughed and it couldn't come up. And I swallowed and it wouldn't come up. And I realized that I was choking. And she said, my thought was, oh my God, I'm going to die without being a nun. At which point, she gave herself a Heimlich, this big clump of couscous went flying out of her mouth, and her decision was made. She was impressed that that was her thought. And clearly it was strong enough in her mind for her to go, oh my God, I'm going to die without being a nun. So it was a very a strong motivating story, actually, for me. And it made me think about all the different reasons that we think about why do we want to ordain. If you like the clothes, if that's the reason, it's not going to last very long. You may not even get to it, just because the outfit's cool. Or if you want to go live in some community because you never were really loved in your family, forget it. If that's your motivation, it is never going to come true. I don't know, finally people will respect me. Finally people will respect me. Forget that too. So it has to be a deeper motivation than that. And honestly, even though we think we've gotten past those kinds of motivations, when you come to the monastery, you discover that you still want to be loved in the way that you are used to recognizing love. Or you discover that, you still are pretty much wanting some respect for who you are, or who you were, or who you think you are, or what that, we have a lot of identities. And as one former nun did a beautiful analogy of talking about how even as we start to dismantle our identities, it's like a house of cards, Any old wind can actually come blow it down. And you work all day to take down your house of cards once you're in the monastery. And by morning, back it is, back it comes. So, the work of taking that apart is not, it's intense. So a superficial reason will not hold up a superficial motivation. So what is a good motivation? Well, for myself, the way my reductionist version of it is, I finally got that the Buddha was telling the truth. The Buddha was telling the truth. Indeed, all conditioned phenomena are impermanent. Indeed, all contaminated phenomena are in the nature of dukkha. Indeed, even though I don't get it on a really gut level, I can understand that all phenomena are empty and selfless. What does that mean? Well, then what's my life about? I guess that's the question it raises. If I start to believe this, if we keep practicing and we keep practicing, and there comes a point where you can't say, oh, yeah, the Buddha was telling the truth, and I'm going to go have another hot fudge sundae before I go do my night at the disco. Somehow these things, if we're honest with ourselves, they don't match. I don't know why I want to cry every time I hold this book up. I love this book. It's a collection of teachings, and they were all teachings, right? Were they all? That Venerable Tridren edited from the Life as a Western Buddhist Nun Conference in 1996. It's out of print. The Abbey has a few copies, but all the stories are online. But they are beautiful sharings by people who have been ordained for a long time, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He says we must constantly remember that the primary reason for holding vows as a nun or a monk is to be able to dedicate ourselves to the practice of the Dharma. And later on in here, or maybe it's Thich Nhat Hanh who says, the purpose is not to build temples. The purpose is not to write books. The purpose is not even to go out and spread the Dharma. The purpose is to practice. The purpose, why do we want to practice? Because we want to be liberated. And at the pratimoksha level, that's really the motivation. It's to be liberated. Now that we're in the Mahayana mode, we also bring along the motivation and try to cultivate it as much as we can that we like everybody else to be too. But when we ordain, it's that wish that I will become liberated because the Buddha was telling the truth, and I trust that. Why do I trust that? Because I've practiced in my life and I see that it's true. Not on faith, not just because, oh, it sounds good, but because I've tested what I've learned and I've come to realize that there's no other way out. Khandro Rinpoche is, she's a very straight-talking person. She says, if you want to move out the moment you do not like something, your life as a monastic will be difficult. If you think about giving back your vows every time your teacher or someone in the monastery says something you do not want to hear, how will you progress? The motivation begins with you. You must begin with a solid, sincere motivation and want to follow a path of renunciation. When you have that motivation, problems will not seem so big, and you will meet teachers and receive teachings without much difficulty. So that's what we need to do. Another of the nuns that I quizzed, maybe quizzed is more likely, more accurate than interviewed, was a Chinese bhikshuni who was also, because I was older. In fact, you might say old. But this other nun was also, had ordained older, a little bit older. She wasn't as old as I was. But in listening to her story, she said, and then she listened to mine, and she said, you have a clear aspiration, that's true, but it's not stable. She said, you need to stabilize this motivation before you actually get clear about what your steps are. And she recommended a practice. Now, she's a very devotional person, and that works for me. But she recommended a practice where she said that she had gone to the temple and just made prostration after prostration after prostration, purifying, purifying, purifying. May I purify the obstacles to making my life meaningful and do what best serves my wish to become fully awakened. It wasn't like, may I become a nun? It wasn't like, may I decide to have a good career and have a good Dharma practice anyway. It was, may I get clear about what's the best way to use this life, my conditions right now, for the goal of liberation and complete awakening. And by making that request over and over and over, and putting your face in the carpet over and over and over and over, opening to a sense of humility about that, then my own experience is it becomes very clear. Becomes very clear. And then this nun's story about, oh my God, I almost died without becoming a nun, wouldn't be my fate, I'm happy to say. One other little piece that I have has been very meaningful for me. Actually, come to think of it, it probably did come about the time I was wrestling with should I, shouldn't I? No, I'm not. I don't know how many times I went to Venerable Children and said, okay, I'm not. I'm just not going to think about it anymore. I'm not going to ordain. But here I sit, right? From the Anguttara Nikaya, the 5 reflections. That's very famous. It's very helpful. I am of the nature to age. I have not gone beyond aging. I am of the nature to sicken. I have not gone beyond sickness. I am of the nature to die. I have not gone beyond dying. All that is mine, beloved, and pleasing will become otherwise, will be separated from me. I am the owner of my karma, heir to my karma. Born of my karma, related to my karma, I abide supported by my karma. Whatever actions I do for good or ill, of that I will be the heir. And when we hold this every day, practice this every day, then looking at our motivation, whether we ordain or not, but how I live my life to use the opportunity I have right now to pursue the liberation that the Buddha said I can have. Why? Because I'm practicing what he said. Why do I believe that? Because I practice other stuff. Because I recognize that if I meditate on the ugliness of the example of the object, my attachment goes away a little bit. Little bit, not much, but a little bit. Enough to make me go, this works. So whatever we do, we all know something works or we wouldn't be sitting in here. So I just leave that with you. And when I ordained, that nun sent me a box of couscous. It was a precious gift and, perishable, or I'd still have it attachment, but it's a good story.